We can dive right in and just overall, how do you think the Biden administration did in their first year?
Yeah, as we kind of look back at the first year, there were certainly ups and downs. I think the initial start of the first year with the passing of the American Rescue Plan, that really was important to get vaccinations out to communities, to help businesses recover and so forth. And things looked really good going into July when it felt like we were starting to open up. Obviously, the Delta wave of COVID hit last summer. That slowed things down a bit. You started to see inflation impact families and the pocketbooks of folks. And then you saw some of the bumpiness around school reopenings and whether our kids could stay in school, et cetera. So I think those were all issues that weighed on Sacramento families and individuals. And then things started to get a little bit better. You had the Omicron wave, and that also impacted things. That said, I think as we kind of come out of the pandemic and start to think about how we live with COVID, I think there's a real opportunity for the Biden administration to pivot, empathize with the pain that we felt over these last 2 years, the impact that's had on families, but also start to talk about how we got our lives back, how we start to live with COVID, and start to put things back together.
I saw that you put out a statement a few weeks ago as a congressman and a former medical professional saying it's time to end the pandemic, that it's here to stay. So I don't have to tell you, when Biden was running for office, he said that he had a solution to end the virus. Do you believe he's accomplished that in any way? What kind of credit can he take for moving America out into this next phase?
I think we can take credit, and some credit goes to the last administration for coming up with these really safe and effective vaccines. I think now's the time for us to admit that COVID's not going away, and we need to learn how to live with COVID. We need to learn how to keep our economy open. We need to learn how to keep our kids in school, but keep them safe, protect teachers, et cetera. And we've learned a lot about this virus. So, I would say we're not going to eliminate COVID, but we are going to learn how to live with COVID.
Democrats have a majority in DC right now. So why is it that you think some of the bigger issues, Build Back Better, voting rights on immigration and whatnot, are having a hard time making it to the president's desk? What do you think is stopping those conversations from moving forward?
I think when you have narrow majorities in the House and a razor-thin majority in a 50-50 Senate, that requires working in a bipartisan way. The big things that we passed, like the American Rescue Plan, although it passed largely with Democratic votes, did have broad support from Republican mayors across the country. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, which again, I'll emphasize bipartisan, had Republican votes. And what we're seeing right now is in these narrow majorities, you've got to work together across the aisle and not get some Republican votes to get things passed. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That actually is probably how Congress should work.
All right. Well, as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee with, a specialty on Asia, how do you think what's happening in Ukraine right now makes us look in the eyes of some of the other, leading countries, China, for example?
Yeah. Well, let me first start with Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine really is tragic. When you see these images playing out in real time, I was in Kyiv, about 4 weeks ago, visiting with President Zelensky, the leadership there, getting a sense of what they needed and how we could assist the people of Ukraine in their own defense. Because our intelligence was pretty clear that, Putin was going to invade the country, and we're seeing that play out. Our hearts also go out to the large Ukrainian population that lives here in the Sacramento region. We're doing everything we can to support the people, to try to get those individuals that have to leave the country across the border into Poland and elsewhere. And talk to the State Department and others yesterday. So we're going to continue doing everything we can assist folks. It's important for us as the world's oldest democracy to really stand up and stand with this young democracy. When I was in Ukraine, the people there were very clear that they were going to fight and die for their country, and they had no interest in living under Russian rule. As a young democracy, Ukraine wants to determine their path forward. This is a war that Vladimir Putin has selectively started. We've got to stand up as the free world, as Europe, as democracies around the world through Asia, and say that is not okay in the 21st century. To your question about China, China is probably watching, but I think they're also watching what's happening to the Russian economy, just how quickly the world came together. And the sanctions and what we're doing in the financial institutions, it's going to have a devastating impact on the Russian economy and the Russian people. Doesn't have to be this way. Again, this is a war that Vladimir Putin has selectively started.
You said that you were in Ukraine just a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and the intelligence was clear that Russia was going to invade and take these actions. Do you believe that the U.S. acted quick enough in these sanctions and other actions?
We were sounding the warning bells. We've been providing defensive weaponry, lethal weaponry to the Ukrainians really for, going back to 2014 when Russia initially invaded Crimea and the Donbas region. I don't know that there was enough time to prepare. I think there was some skepticism from the Ukrainians that Russia would actually invade. Again, hats off to our intelligence community. The intelligence was very accurate, and it played out exactly the way the intelligence community was publicly saying what Russia was going to do. Again, this escalation that we're seeing happen today is really tragic, with the Russians targeting civilian targets within some of the major cities. You're seeing the major convoy, starting to encircle Kyiv. My message to Vladimir Putin is this doesn't need to happen. There's no threat to Russia's sovereign territory from Ukraine. And again, let's de-escalate this. Let's find a way to have a ceasefire, and then let's figure out how to, live in peace and stability and prosperity in the 21st century.
Just a few days ago, I interviewed the former foreign minister of affairs of Russia, and he told me that he does not believe Putin will bring it to the level of nuclear warfare, that it will be self-destruction, and he doesn't seem like a man, based off of the photos of him sitting far away from his team, that wants to harm himself in any way. Do you believe that we could get to that point of nuclear warfare?
I don't. I think if that were to happen, then, Russia would forever, or at least for the foreseeable future, be a pariah that would be isolated and devastated, because the response of Russia were to use nuclear arms would actually have to be a devastating response to Russia. That's not anything that anyone wants, and that's not anything that I think the Russian people desire. Let's again find a path to ceasefire and try to de-escalate tensions in the region. I think that's what we have to do. And again, we have to make sure Mr. Putin understands the price that he is going to pay, and try to insulate the Russian people. This is Vladimir Putin's doing, his decision, and hopefully the Russian people will rise up and say enough's enough.
Shifting a little bit back towards the State of the Union, obviously polls are just a snapshot in time, but why do you think that what we're seeing right now, Biden's approval ratings are dropping? Why do you think that is?
I think way too many American families are struggling. They're seeing high prices of gas and basic commodities like milk and food, and and the struggle with keeping your kids in school. I'm very empathetic to the challenge our children have faced, having not had regular schooling, but also the real challenge that parents have faced. And I think people are tired of COVID, and I think the majority of folks want to start figuring out, how do we live with COVID, but how do we get our lives back? And I hope that's the pivot that we hear out of the president today, in terms of how do we start looking forward and living with COVID? How do we start addressing the inflation that we're seeing out there, and addressing gas prices? How do we also start addressing some of those supply chain issues that really have impacted us? So there's a lot out there. And then you throw on what's happening in Ukraine on top of all of that.
Yeah, I think I saw a preview from the chief of staff or his press team saying that he's going to address inflation during the speech. That's obviously a big topic. And one of the things he's going to say is he's going to call on Congress to put something on his desk to address inflation and whatnot. So I guess that puts the pressure back on you guys. What do you think is as of right now, an immediate solution to help with inflation in this country?
There's no quick solution. I think a couple things that we could do are, continue to push more petroleum out there in the sense of our strategic petroleum reserves to try to bring down the cost of gas prices. Certainly making sure that our economy continues to open up and that we continue to put people to work. I think we've got to make sure we've got a workforce on our farms and in construction and everything else that can start to bring prices down. And then there's the longer term issue, the supply chain issue. We're so dependent on China. We've got to start bringing some of those jobs back to the United States. We've got to start looking for other places to supply, important resources like semiconductors. And again, where we can, let's bring those jobs back to the United States.
Wonderful. Well, I could ask you a million more questions, but I don't want to keep you forever. So I'll end by asking, I guess, in this last year, has the Biden administration met your expectations, exceeded them, or not quite there at all yet?
I think they did very well in the first half of the year. I think they ran into some bumps in the second half of the year. Obviously, the withdrawal from Afghanistan could have gone more smoothly. I like the fact that they're starting to shift their focus to inflation and bread and butter pocketbook issues. I'd like us to shift from the COVID pandemic to learning how to live with COVID and really focus on how we get our lives back. And I think that's what the American people want to see as well.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Anything else I should have asked you?
No, other than, this is a challenging time in the world. We're seeing what's happening. And this is really a time where you hope Democrats and Republicans can come together, support, what the administration is trying to do overseas, but also support our troops. And again, no one's talking about putting troops in Ukraine, but we are going to support this young democracy in Ukraine.
I guess you reminded me that I should ask you one of the other huge things right here in Sacramento and California. The Biden administration has spoken about making it a priority, climate change. What do you think he's going to discuss tonight in his State of the Union in regards to what the UN says is an immediate threat to our future generations?
I mean, we see it in Sacramento with regards to this ongoing drought. In December, we were pretty hopeful with the amount of snow that we were getting and so forth, but you went to that dry January. And again, I hope we get some April showers and fill up the reservoirs. But our droughts are getting worse, our wildfires are getting worse, and we really do have to try to figure out how we reduce our carbon emissions, understanding the impact of gas prices, and start moving towards more carbon neutral energy sources that are hopefully going to be cheaper and more sustainable.
Does California lead the way for the country on that? Will the US copy its framework off of what California is doing?
As a lifelong Californian, I'm always proud with how we kind of lean into and visualize what the future looks like. And we have always been a leader on climate change. We've been a leader on technology and innovation. And I think we continue to do so. And I'm happy for California to lead the way and for folks to see what we're doing, what works, and then follow.